Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Process Podcast. Liam Carmichael, how you doing?
Good afternoon, Edward.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
How's your day going?
Just like every other basically Wednesday I'm on this podcast, very similar.
Okay, actually, more than stop.
Yeah.
Let me ask you another question.
Let's do a different one.
How's your training going at the moment?
Training has been going really good up until Monday, where I tweaked my back.
How did you tweak your back?
So basically, we're doing clean complexes. On the last set, the last rep of my squat clean, I received the bar in the bottom, and I just felt a wee tweak in my back, which didn't feel too good. Dropped the barbell, kind of shaked it off, and then we're supposed to go into touch and go deadlifts. Picked up the first barbell for a warm up, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then so my back's not been good, to be honest. Now it's completely better though.
1 day, 2 days.
2 days. Yesterday I took training off, and I was actually quite sad in terms of just like, I was like, fuck, now my back is gone. That's me for the rest of my life. My back is never going to get better. And I woke up this morning after a really good sleep, and my back is already feeling better. I managed to train today. Didn't do any hinging, but still trained, so it's positive.
So funny how that happens. I mean, it's happened to me so many times, and even sometimes with the same injury. Just it seems every time it's like, this is it. This one's different. Yes. Like, this is going to be the last time I'm ever.
Feels different.
I'm never going to be able to bend my knee again.
Yeah.
But then, adherence to lifestyle essentials, I think, which we talk about all the time, is often all you need to bring information down in your body to be back on the healing track again.
And essentially that's all it was. It was just inflammation. I just looked at the past week that I had. We had quite an intense week of training, but we also had an intense week of work as well. A lot of cognitive demand, like every single day we're finishing a wee bit later. Then we ran a barbell meet on the Saturday. We also trained the Saturday morning. Yeah. And I just wasn't feeling too good on the Sunday in terms of recovery.
We also didn't eat on Saturday.
Yeah, because we were judging for the barbell
meet. I think we both had like at least an 8-hour stint with no food when we would normally be eating every 3 to 4 hours.
I was chalk white, apparently. Yeah, people were looking at me like, Liam, are you okay?
Yeah, I was struggling as well. I think there's just a lot of things that accumulated and built up. And I think that's just such an important thing to have, right? That's why we talk about this all the time, that you've got to have awareness. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you'll always be able to know when an injury is coming and prevent it from happening. Injuries are still going to happen. It's a part of the process sometimes. But being able to do what you did, reflect and ask yourself a question, why did this happen? So many times people get injured and just think, it was just shit luck, just happened. No idea why. Now, sometimes it obviously does happen. Like, you might just get unlucky. But most times, I would say 9 out of 10 times, there's a reason that your body is breaking down or functioning in a way that is far from optimal. And being able to connect the dots and look back at the last week, months, and understand why. And I think another good thing you did was like you made a change immediately, which was going to take the next day off training, going to prioritize health, sleep, recovery, good nutrition, and then I'll ease back into it next day.
What they say is, I think I heard it from you. I think you probably took it from someone else. It's like listen to your body when it whispers, not when it screams.
Yes, I got that quote from, I think it was on a power athlete podcast, and they had a guy, really and a guy talking about ACLs, and it was his quote: "Listen when it whispers, not when it screams." And it's so good, But what's interesting is that you messaged me yesterday and said, "I'm just going to take a day off," and I said, "Is everything okay?" And you said, "I'm just listening when it whispers." Kind of, we've said that quote a few times. And then that next day, or that day, I asked myself, I'm like, do I have anything that's whispering to me right now? And there was like a couple of little things. It's like, okay, knees maybe a little bit stiffer than it normally is in the morning. Shoulder feels a little bit tight doing my cars in the morning. Maybe I need to take a rest. And so I pulled back a little bit, but I still did it and I still moved. And so it's so hard to know, because sometimes you have whispers and you can just push through and you're totally fine. Sometimes you have whispers, you ignore it, and the next day you're broken. Anyway, nice. I'm glad you're okay now, Liam.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
How's training going?
My training is actually going really well.
Yeah, nice.
It's like, honestly, I would say in the last couple of years, this is probably the best my training. And what I'm using to judge how good my training is really like how my body feels. I've been pretty strictly adhering to the deload phases of the LPC program. I have been definitely erring on the side of like lighter, more conservative, focusing more on quality versus intensity. But I'm doing a lot of movement. Like we've been doing running stuff, movement stuff, playing sport on Thursday, sprints, things I haven't done in a long time. I've jazzed up my morning movement protocol. So I'm doing like a lot of squat therapy work every day.
That seems to be paying off pretty well.
It's made, honestly, such a huge difference. And I first learned about squat therapy, when you first start CrossFit.
You're L1,
And then I learned from Ido Portal, how long ago was that? 10 years ago, and he talked about the importance of like being in a squat every day and creating protocols. And Kelly Starrett used to say like, do certain activity in a squat, and at the time I would do it all the time, and I just kind of along the way just forgot about the importance of it. And then noticed watching a lot of my performance videos from last year, doing CrossFit Open workouts, qualifier workouts. I upload a lot of like not biggest, not the word I should use, but my main lifts, technical lifts I upload to my own YouTube page just for my own future reference. And sometimes I'll just go back through the archives. And I started to notice that my squatting depth last year was getting shallower and shallower, and it wasn't the deepest.
It wasn't the deepest
to start anyway. And I was questioning myself at the time, thinking like, I know I have osteoarthritis in my knee. I know it's something that's degenerative, so it gets worse and worse every year. So I was thinking, shit, maybe it's just gotten to the point now where my deepest knee flexion is actually above parallel. And then I was actually thinking like, shit, I don't think that probably means I can't do the sport anymore. Like I'm actually gonna have to stop doing competitive CrossFit if I can't meet the movement standard. I can't do it. And so I thought, okay, you know what? Have I really given my full effort to try and restore a good bottom position? And I was like, not really. I just kind of do a lot of above parallel work and then go straight into loaded squatting on a squat day and expect that I can do it. And so actually I said, you know what? I need to maybe go back to basics here. So it was you who first started doing it. Actually, again, you said you'd done like 2 or 3 days of squat therapy. You said
really good.
Yeah, you're like, I've just been sitting in a squat the last couple of days, and I was like, I used to do that all the time, and I just don't do it anymore. So then I was like, you know what, I'm going to put this in. I already have a movement protocol every morning, so it was easy to add it to it. And so I said, all right, I'm just going to finish my movement protocol with at least 2 minutes in a squat. And it's not just, I don't sit just in a squat. I play with different variations of the squat. I do isometrics. I do different heights, different ranges. But every morning, different stances. I've done it every morning now since that day, which I'd probably say has been about 2 months, maybe more, 3 months.
I think maybe like 3 months for sure.
We did a 12-week phase, so probably like over 3 months, and I haven't missed a day, even on Sundays.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And I'm seeing it now carry over into my strength training, and the bottom position feels good, and it's increased my squatting tolerance. So I've been able to now, this cycle we're squatting really 3 times a week, loaded squatting, and it feels good every time. And touch wood, I haven't had a right knee flare up in 16 weeks. I'd probably
That's
normally...
pretty crazy. Consider when I first came here, it was like every 4 weeks there was like something wrong with your knee, and you would skip out that squatting session. Yeah. Now that's been how many sessions you've done for?
It's been like 14 weeks now.
14 weeks where you're continuously squatting. Now we're overhead squatting, we're squat snatching, we're squat cleaning, so a lot of dynamic movements, and the knees seem to be holding up, so must be doing something right.
Yeah, and I would say the biggest thing that normally cripples my progression with training or my consistency would be my knee. And the fact that that's been good, and I think this has a lot to do with it, has meant that I strung together 16 weeks without having to take any breaks, and it feels awesome. And I'm even I don't mean this in a bad way, but seeing you drop off and pick up an injury, and to think that I'm still going.
I was thinking that myself. I'm supposed to be a bit more resilient than Ed, and I've picked up an injury. How's he still going?
I genuinely think that's what everyone thinks. When someone else breaks and I'm still turning up to train, everyone's like, fuck, something's wrong here.
Something's wrong.
How is Ed still on the training floor, and why am I sidelined? And I was genuinely thinking like, this is amazing. I'm actually coming in feeling good today.
That's pretty good. Nice.
So, I'm feeling good. Thanks, buddy.
There we go.
Okay, let's get into this. We are going to do a Q&A. I bloody love a Q&A.
Q&As.
These questions, want to say thank you to our listeners. Not just listeners, also these are some questions that Liam, you received from some people on your Instagram when you did a Q&A. Some questions that I received from people when I posted a Q&A, which I have to admit, I actually never got round to answering. So apologies. Thanks for your questions, guys. I'm actually going to dig into them in even more detail today.
Pretty good platform to be doing them on, though, on the podcast for sure.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Just because, I do really like Instagram Q&As because it forces you to be concise. You have 15 to 30 seconds to try and drop some nugget in gold. And I actually did, because I went through probably a 3-year process of doing that once every week or 2 weeks.
It's so beneficial.
And I loved it.
As a coach,
I got better and better at being able to be concise and put complex matters into layman's terms by doing it. So I think got better at public speaking, because I remember when I first started doing it.
You can just articulate a lot better, right?
Totally, yeah. So I think now I like being able to do this and dig into more detail. Okay, so We won't set a time cap on each one, but we're going to try and keep it concise-ish.
Yeah.
We've got 10 questions to get through. All these questions are really around the concepts or topics of strength, conditioning, training, coaching, life, health, wellness. Basically what this podcast is all about.
Nice.
Okay. So Liam, I'll ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
You can kick it off.
Yeah.
If you don't want to kick it off, you can just say, Ed, you kick this one off. Ready to go. First question. How do you program for someone who doesn't have any specific performance goals?
Really good question. I think just like in terms of like we've got to figure out obviously who the person is, right? And ourselves that we don't just use things in the gym to measure success. It can be things outside of the gym. Example, relationships, sleep, like we talked about in the last podcast. It can be just focusing on lifestyle essentials, like really nailing your water. These are all goals that you can go for that are not really performance based. Inside the gym, well, then we're just talking about like structural balance. Like we're taking the individual through, maybe it's taking them through the strength continuum. Maybe it's taking someone from motor control and they want to go all the way up and express absolute speed, for example. There's a million ways that you can skin the cat, but we've got ratios and things that we think that people should be able to do. And that's how we base our programming off, right?
Yeah, so I think just dig into this, like what this question is really asking is that, because we talked a lot on this podcast about, how do we program for the build program? How do we build a program for a CrossFitter? How do we program for someone building towards a sports competition? Yeah. Those are very, very specific goals. But here what we're saying is that this person doesn't have a timeline. So number one, not trying to get fit or be able to do X, Y, and Z by a certain time. And there's nothing specifically that they actually want to work on. So they don't care about back squatting, don't really care about pull-ups. So how do you actually go about and design a training program? Totally love what you said at the start. Like, remember, as a coach, we're obviously generally think about so much more than just the training. But when we talk about the training, I think obviously the goals are important still. Yeah. Like if people don't have performance-based goals, they're probably going to have some form of general goal. It might be like live long and prosper. It might feel good. It might be, some form of like body composition metric they're striving for. So I think firstly, we need to understand what that is, because that will dictate, generally speaking, what the training process is going to look like. But I think, a very simple way to look at it would be respecting the strength continuum. Yeah. Is that so for those who don't know what the strength continuum is generally speaking on one end of the spectrum where we generally start with people when it comes to resistance training is we want to start by developing muscle endurance and motor control. So that's generally speaking like slower contractions, higher repetitions at lower loads. And over time, now time is obviously dependent on the person. Let's say it's a 1 year period. We are slowly moving that person from that one end of the strength continuum down towards the opposite end of the strength continuum. So on the opposite end, you'll have like absolute strength and power. So the strength continuum is basically a model that says, to get someone to be as powerful as possible, we have to go through the prerequisite steps to get there. So we go from motor control, which is just learning how to move a dumbbell or a barbell or their body weight, move into muscle endurance. Then we're kind of moving into like hypertrophy. Then we're moving into like strength endurance, and then we're moving to absolute strength, and then we're moving into like strength, speed, and power. So generally, we can use that approach for someone who doesn't really have any goals specifically and start on the higher end, and essentially over, let's say, a 1 year period, we just linearly progress them. And then when the next year starts, we just kind of go back to start and then we move all the way back down again. Of course, we could do a different model, which is we're combining different facets of the strength continuum within a week. So for example, you may have one day which is a higher rep day, you may have one day which is a lower rep high intensity day, but that's something we're probably going to use with more kind of intermediate to advanced people. And then I think let's dig into what you talked about, structural balance. I think if someone doesn't have any specific goals, well, like we always do here, we say, well, let's try and let's respect the strength continuum, let's get this person as strong or whatever it is as possible, but let's do it whilst trying to keep them as balanced as possible. And so the strength ratios is something that I initially learned through Charles Poliquin. You learned, and both of us learned through OPEX, and that was taken from Charles Poliquin. You can have a look on the internet. If you just type in on Google, optimal strength, structural balance ratios or strength ratios, you'll see things like what should a back squat be relative to a deadlift? What should a front squat be relative to a back squat? What should a bench press be relative to a pull-up? And the process of training is constantly just looking at trying to keep that athlete as balanced as possible. So if you start to identify, this person is a weaker horizontal presser than they are a vertical puller, well, then the next training cycle, we may just bias some horizontal pressing to get them up. But I think at the end of the day, a concept we always talk about is that when we're trying to strive for adaptation, we can't improve everything at once. So the same principle applies to this individual we're talking about. We're going to pick 2, 3, maybe a maximum of 4 things that we're going to work on for anywhere between a 4 to 8 to 12 week training cycle. And we're going to focus on trying to get whatever it is that we're trying to improve, let's say stronger in those things. And everything else kind of goes into maintenance mode. When the next cycle starts, we pick the next 4 things we want to prioritize, and everything else goes into maintenance mode. And so it's not that we're trying to keep a person structurally balanced all the time. You may create biases within training cycles, but overall, the overall year, the macro cycle, we want that individual to be as balanced as possible. Question to you, what about resistance training versus aerobic training? What kind of ratio or balance are you looking for someone who doesn't have any performance goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think then it's just going to be, well, just blended training. If the person's coming to you and say, "Oh, I want to be fit for life. I want to do fitness for life." Well, we know for life we need to be strong, but we also know for life that we have to be aerobically fit. Now, aerobically fit doesn't mean that you're doing high intensity workouts. It just maybe means like it's long, slow, steady cardio. That can be one facet. I think what's important to remember here is that when we're talking about like strength ratios and structural balance, what I like to do with my clients, if they don't have a goal, I will bring it back into their life and understand, well, we're trying to get you structurally balanced for life. Like we want you to be strong in your horizontal pressing because that can carry over to life. We want you to be strong in your double-legged squat because that carries over to life. And always trying to relay that information back to your client's needs and your client's wants.
Totally.
And that also creates so much buy-in from your client. I've had clients that have came to me and they're just like, "Oh, I'm not quite sure." When you lay out maybe the strength continuum or you lay out the structural balance and you test, I don't know, their 8 rep max rear foot elevated split squat. We know that should be roughly like 32% of their body weight in each hand. When you test it and they're not quite there, they're like, "Oh shit,
I want to get that."
Yeah, then that creates buy-in as well, you know?
Yeah, and I think in the same way, when we're designing these training cycles, is to communicate. Okay, so this cycle, Liam, we're going to be working on a goblet squat, 20 rep max. We're going to be working on a strict pull-up, AMRAP set of your body weight, and then we're going to do a push-up AMRAP test. Nice. That's going to be our priority for the next 8 weeks. And so as a client, you have buy-in. Okay, this is going to be my focus. At the end of that, you do some testing. For sure, you got to get some litmus tests and see if we were able to achieve what we wanted to achieve, and then simply we just reset the goals.
And you just rinse and repeat, right?
And you just rinse and repeat. I mean, like, how many exercises are there that we can potentially choose from? How many rep ranges can we choose from? As long as you can justify as a coach why you're doing it, then there's no right or wrong. And again, just applying that back to the strength continuum. We can't just start by doing 1 rep maxes. We've got to do.
Yeah, we've got to respect that continuum for sure.
Nice. Awesome. Oh, there's so much more we could say, but let's stop there.
Let's stop there. Question number 1.
Okay, moving on to question number 2. How do you progress aerobic training?
Will I kick this off?
Kick it off.
I think this could obviously be a very lengthy conversation. We could probably take up 60 minutes just on this, but I think just general guidelines that we're thinking of, where you've got to start someone from really long and slow, and you're going to progress them to short and fast. That's the general framework and the general continuum that you're going to start with. In terms of equipment and modalities, we use a framework. It's called like the 4 C's. So we want to start with cyclical, right?
What does that mean?
So cyclical would be like just a cyclical piece of equipment. So monostructural. So like a rower, air bike, assault bike, ski erg, running. Choose one. Start really long and slow and progress that to short and fast.
Yeah.
Then maybe add in a second piece of cyclical equipment, whether that be rowing and assault bike. Progress that. Once we get really good there, then we can move that into like a circuit. So we can maybe add like another modality, which maybe something like body weight. So it's maybe like row, ski erg, air squats, and you're just doing that in circuit fashion, and you're just progressing that along that framework, which remind me again starts with cyclical, circuit, chipper, constant variance. I nailed that there. Nice.
We had a bit of a mental block the other day trying to think of that.
We did, yeah. It was the first one we couldn't think of. Cyclical. We're like, where's that?
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about like why do we start long and why do we go from long to short. And I think a lot of this is, okay, number 1 is to do like foundations in the same concept, in the same way we talked about the strength continuum, starting with like lighter, less intense, higher volume. The same has to be applied to the aerobic system, but I think also from like an awareness of pacing. That's such a big thing that everyone needs to be aware of, even if it's not a sport that you're doing. It's essential when we talk about aerobic training, we're trying to think about sustainable, repeatable work, and that's a really important facet we need to understand. Aerobic training does not mean going as hard as you possibly can, so that when you complete the distance or the time that you've set, you cannot do any more. And when we start to get into that realm, we're now kind of starting to get into kind of anaerobic training on what we would call non-sustainable training. So to understand how to make 10 minutes of work sustainable, or how to make a 2K run sustainable, we need to have some knowledge, some awareness of a pace that we need to hold to make that appropriate. So generally speaking, we start by going longer and going slower, and it's a lot easier for us to know how to go faster. It's a lot harder for us to know how to go slower, because we don't, once you've gone over that red line and you know, beyond the point of return, we've all been there at some point, it's very hard to know how you could have done that better. So generally speaking, like, we always want to be working somewhat sub-maximally with our aerobic training, and we start longer and slower, and we always know, okay, it's simple. If we're working, if the distance is reduced or the time that I need to work for is reduced, I can just go a little bit faster than I did last week, and so on and so forth. Anything to add on that?
Pretty much it.
Awesome. So generally speaking, start long, start slow. That might even mean walking for someone who's never done aerobic training before. And over time, you're going to reduce the distance or the time domain and increase the intensity.
Nice.
And again, you know, once you're working with someone who's maybe more intermediate and advanced, perhaps you don't need to go through that whole process anymore. You can kind of just jump in anywhere. But of course, you've got to develop that system first. Awesome. Okay, next question. I think you'll like this one. Best training split for beginners. I think we firstly need to define, when we say training split, I think let's talk about resistance training here.
Okay, so just resistance.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to go back to, I know all we're doing is going back to principles.
Yes.
Right. So when we talked about strength, we're talking about the continuum. When we talked about aerobic, we're talking about a framework, and we're talking about that continuum. So when we're talking about a beginner, well, first we've got to figure out what is a beginner. So what would you classify as a beginner in resistance training?
Well, I would say technically the terms like novice or beginner really refers to anyone who's done like 0 to 3, sometimes even up to 5 years of resistance training. But I would generally say in this case, let's say this is someone who hasn't really done any resistance training before. So stepping into the gym or working with a coach for the very first time. I think one assumption we can definitely make is that the training frequency for a beginner, so the amount of sessions they do in a week, is going to be lower than someone who's an intermediate or advanced. So I think for safety's sake, for argument's sake, I should say, let's say this individual is training 2 to 3 times per week.
Well, I think so now we've got to understand if that's a beginner, right? So going back to that strength continuum we talked about, what's the first step of that strength continuum? Well, it's motor control, right? So in order to get motor control, what does that individual need? That individual needs multiple touches across multiple different patterns or multiple different muscle groups, whatever way you want to program, right? So in terms of, say, they're training 3 times a week, we want to be doing a split that's called full body resistance, or FBR. Reason that they're doing full body resistance is going back to, like we just said, they need multiple touches of the same movement in order to see progress, and in order to actually just learn that movement, in order to gain that motor control, they need multiple touches throughout the week. And that's why we would give them full body resistance.
Yes, I think it's really important to define what do we mean by motor control. It's essentially teaching someone the skill of doing a movement. And we know when you're acquiring a new skill the first time, let's say it's a dumbbell press, you've never trained before, you see what happens when you put 2 dumbbells in someone's hands. Those dumbbells are wobbling,
all over the place, right?
Wobbling everywhere, losing control of dumbbells. And the focus, what that individual is experiencing, is not really strength adaptations. It's just trying to learn how to control the damn dumbbells. And what we're saying, what you're saying here is that we need to give this individual more constant touches if we're going to develop that skill. Now, we know with any skill, if you only do that thing once a week, so once every 6-7 days, then your rate of adaptation or your rate of learning is going to be slower versus the person who's doing that once every 3 days or once every 4 days. So that's what we're saying here, is that in those early stages of learning, we need to be doing less variety. We need to be getting more touches of the same movements until we've developed the motor control, the skill aspect. and then we can start to explore more. So what you're saying by FBR, Liam, we're essentially saying full body resistance. That means in a training session, we are doing some legs and we're doing some upper body, or we're doing pushing, pulling, we're doing hinging, squatting, we're doing lunging, split squatting, whatever you want to, however you're, constructing your training program, but we're doing bits of everything. So we're giving that individual more frequent touches.
Nice.
I think another thing to just understand there for people listening is that when you are a beginner, we are able to create less of a neurological response from training because we haven't done enough of the movement yet. So, a heavy set for a beginner feels very different to a heavy set for an advanced athlete. A heavy set for an advanced person is going to really take a lot of resources out of them. It's going to mean the recovery process is going to be a little bit longer versus a beginner haven't developed the skill yet, haven't developed the neurological inroads exactly to be able actually to express a really heavy rep. So they'll be able to finish a heavy set and a minute later be totally fine and ready to do it again.
And I think we use the analogy all the time of the light bulb, right? Like that individual that's coming and you give the example of the bench press, like they need to be doing higher reps. Like you can't be giving that beginner like 3 reps, because essentially it's only getting 2 reps of that movement. They can't express intensity, or they don't have that motor control to express that intensity. So it's important to also remember when we are working with beginners, well, what else do we need? We need full body resistance, but we also need higher tempo, right? Because we're trying to really control that movement, but we also need higher rep ranges. So there we're maybe thinking of like that 10, maybe even up to like 15 reps in order to get some sort of dose response.
Absolutely. Bang on. Anything else we want to add?
No.
Awesome. Okay, question 4. Oh, this is loaded question.
Oi.
I feel my strength numbers have plateaued. How do I get stronger? Okay, I think my first question I'm going to have to ask this individual is, because there are so many reasons as to why our strength numbers can be plateauing. So let's start there. Why might an individual's strength numbers be plateauing? I'll start first one. Overtraining.
Yeah, well, I was going to say recovery.
Yeah.
So overtraining and under-recovering.
Perfect. Another one could be they're undertraining.
Yeah.
They're simply not doing enough. They're not creating enough stress in their body to actually progress. What else? Maybe even outside the training room. Maybe it's got actually nothing to do with training.
Yeah, I think just going back to it's just other stressors.
Other stresses.
I mean, like we talked about, like if you are under-recovering, that might be the stressors that you're putting on in the gym. But we kicked this podcast off saying about all the other stressors that's happening to me personally, and we've got to take that into consideration. You can only, like, what's the phrase that they use? It's you're not actually overtrained, you're just under-recovered, right?
Of those 3, so basically undercooking it, overcooking it, and I guess just not managing your stresses enough. Obviously, there could be other things as well. There's so many. Not getting enough calories in, not getting the right foods and nutrients into the body.
If you're in a calorie deficit, for example, it's very hard to gain strength.
Exactly. It could just be the wrong type of training. If this person's talking about getting stronger, but they're doing metabolic or hypertrophy work all the time, well, perhaps that's why you're not getting stronger. So then there are so many, things that could potentially lead to why someone is not getting stronger. But I think for this individual, obviously, it would have to start with some form of just questions. You've just got to pose questions.
We've got to get some context
to try to identify what that thing is. But I think maybe something that we should just generally talk about here is the concept of minimal recoverable volume. That's something we talk MRV. We talk about it a lot. And essentially what that concept is talking about is we should be constantly striving to do the least amount of work that still moves the needle forward. So the least amount of work that drives the biggest amount of adaptation. What most people do is they do too much. They do everything. And then they end up having to pull back and pull back and pull back when they realize that what they're doing is not sustainable. Now, your minimum recoverable volume, which essentially, let me just dumb it down even more, is like, you want to be striving to do the least amount of training that's still going to get you, in this case, stronger. Now, if what you're doing in this case is, let's say, 2 sessions a week and you're getting stronger, do we need to do more? We actually don't. Like, what you're doing is already leading to success. Why do you need to change it?
I feel like that's a very hard conversation with some people. Like the whole of the world, like society is telling everybody to do more, right? And what we're basically saying is we want you to be doing less but still see adaptations. So when you're only given, 3 sets of bench press, and that person's maybe had other experiences, would have been doing 8 sets of 10 or whatever that protocol was, GVT or whatever it was. Now they have to come back, and we're saying, oh, you can do 2, but you're still getting stronger. That's a hard pill for some people to swallow, right?
It's totally. Comparison is the thief of all joy. Sometimes comparison is comparison against our former selves as well. What was I going to say there? Something on that note. I think it's really important to, that's it. It's the concept of, once you've established what your minimum recoverable volume is, you have to also understand that's going to be changing on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, as like life goes on and the stresses of life continue, you know, the amount of volume that you can successfully adapt to may change from one week to another. And this is where, like, you know, the advanced, very aware athlete has an advantage, is they know how to adjust things like training volume, intensity, selection on a daily, weekly basis, which is called self-regulation. We talk about all the time, and to still be moving the needle towards their goals. So, I mean, anything else to add on? That's a really hard one to answer.
Yeah, it's a very loaded question.
It's a very loaded question. Yeah.
I think just one last thing on the we're also talking about this with training, but also we're talking about like that minimal effective dose is essentially what we're saying is also in your lifestyle. We want that to be happening as well. Yeah. Like this is a principle that we can use for everything in life.
Yes. I mean, give me some examples there.
Well, like nutrition, sleep.
So, for example,
like everything.
What we're saying with nutrition is like, maybe you don't need to be weighing and measuring every single meal 5 days for 5 meals a day. Actually, maybe, you know, you could just be eyeballing your meals and just being super consistent and eating to 85% full, and that might get you better.
100%.
Obviously, with all this, you need to specify what better is, what success is to you. Good question. Hope we provided you with some value on that. I think just we've probably given you more questions than answers there. Okay, next one. Question 5, halfway through. How do you program for a fitness competition?
I'll let you kick this one off.
So we are actually we've just hosted a competition.
Yeah.
We've just run a barbell competition, and we are just about to go live with the Process Summer Throwdown, which is an annual competition, online comp, 3 weeks. 6 workouts that we do every year.
Oh yeah.
So I've been behind programming. I'm always kind of behind, I guess. I have a part to play in every competition that we run, and I do really, really love programming for competitions. So I think the very first question I'm always going to ask myself with fitness competition is, what are we trying to achieve with this competition? Yeah. So an example with the barbell meet that we just ran, the goal was inclusivity.
Yeah.
So we actually wanted to create a competition. It was a team competition, but we wanted to allow beginners, intermediates, and advanced athletes to be on the same teams, throw down and have some fun. Hong Kong hadn't had a competition in 2.5 years. So the goal wasn't necessarily to find the fittest or the strongest team. It was like, how can we create a competition that allows all these people to train together and have fun? Now the Summer Throwdown, that's different. Yeah. Like the parameters for the Summer Throwdown there are prerequisites for each competition, for each division that we're running, which means that people have to be in the CrossFit space. They have to be somewhat capable people, or I should say capable athletes within the movements that we see in the sport. Yeah. And the goal is essentially over 6 workouts to find the fittest individual in each of the categories, male and female. So that for me makes it a lot easier instantly. So the next question is, well, what test do we need to see if we want to find the fittest individual? So that's where we're looking. I'm always going to look for like, how can we make this as balanced as possible? So we don't want to just bias workouts to find the strongest athlete. That's not the intention. We don't want to bias workouts to find the aerobically the fittest athlete. That's not the intention. We don't want to bias the workouts to find the best gymnast. So we need to try to find a way. And in this case, we have 6 tests for the Summer Throwdown, which is nice because you've got more variety then.
We've got more opportunities.
More opportunity to test. The first thing I would do is like, okay, what are the tests that I want to make sure I cover over these 6 tests? So categories might be something like an absolute strength test. Another category might be like a long aerobic test. Another test might be like a barbell battery test where you're working at like moderately heavy loads over and over again. Another test may be like, I want to see a sprint test. So something below 4 minutes, something short, fast, high output. Something might be like a fatigue-based Olympic lift, strength speed test. So the next thing I would do is kind of write out all the tests that I want to make sure I cover. Nice. And then it's a simple matter of like, okay, then thinking about, well, what movements do I actually want to test? So something we thought about with the Summer Throwdown is, because of a lot of the people taking part in the Summer Throwdown are our Process programming subscribers, which means that they are training with us every week.
Yeah.
They've been following our training cycle, training program. So with the design for this program, for this competition, I wanted to factor in what our athletes have actually been doing. So for example, our compete athletes haven't really been doing any ring muscle ups so far this season. They've been doing a lot of like dipping, doing a lot of pull-ups, doing a lot of like chest to bar technique work, but we haven't done any ring muscle ups. So therefore putting ring muscle ups into competition, have we really set up our athletes for success?
Yeah.
Not only in terms of performance, but also in terms of health. You know, like, do we want to be throwing them onto rings when they haven't done a ring muscle up potentially in 2-3 months? No. So next would be going through all the divisions. What movements do we want to be testing? So now we're narrowing things down. We have clarity on what we're trying to achieve. We have clarity on the tests that we want to test. Then we have clarity on the movements that we want to test within those tests. And then, just like in program design, it's just putting it all together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the process. Have you anything I missed out?
Just two things that what I took from that, which was really good. I mean, two principles that we talk about all the time is, well, one, reverse engineering, right? Nice. It's like taking something and we now know what we want. Let's just work backwards from there.
Yes.
The second principle that I took from that was the client-centric approach, where we were now talking about, well, should we really be testing, like the words that you used was, well, we want to set our client up for success. And I think that's a really important note to go off of, is as coaches, you want to be setting your client up for success, right? So that just goes back to that client-centric approach, which I really liked.
Yeah. And I also think it's like too often competition programmers get so wrapped up in like trying to redefine the wheel, you know, like
redefine what fitness is.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's like, you know, coming up with unnecessary complex movements, you know, programming the hardest, most complex things like, you know, maybe pistols or, you know, freestand handstands, which look really cool when you can do them. But at the end of the day, generally speaking, I generally always lean towards, I want this to be a good expression of fitness. You know, I would say, sometimes it's good to test skills. But, you know, if I only have 6 tests, do I want one of those tests to be a very, very high skill workout? Maybe not. I think maybe if I was programming for the CrossFit Games and I've got
a different story, right?
10, 12 tests, then you've got more opportunity to get a little bit more creative, a little bit more fancy, a little bit crazy with your programming. Nice. Should we move on?
Let's do it.
Question 6. How do you plan and run PD sessions at Coastal and the process? I'm happy to kick this off, but I would also love to hear your thoughts, because obviously you're a part of PDs as a participant and sometimes driving them as well. So I think firstly, like, why do we run PD sessions? Well, like, for us as an organization, there's numerous parts of this. The obvious answer is like, we want to always be developing our coaches here. So that means, you know, constantly pushing them, challenge them to improve, to think about things differently, to broaden their horizons, to learn new skill sets. But number 2, as an organization as well, especially in the coaching industry, it is like, I always ask myself the question, like, what value am I providing to my people? And obviously the simple value that most gym owners will think is like, well, I'm giving them a place to train people. I'm referring clients to them. But they get to a point in a coach's career where they kind of realize, I could be kind of generating my own clients here. I could find my own gym to train. So I'm always asking myself, like, what can I give to my coaches that they can get nowhere else? And one of those things I think is like, you know, sharing experience, wisdom, professional, and that's how we do it in the professional development sessions. So it's always been ingrained as a part of our culture. It's like, I want to be sharing everything that I've learnt. I want individuals in a team who have unique skill sets, talents, pieces of knowledge to be sharing that with everyone else. And together it upgrades our prescription of coaching as a team. And ultimately it's a win-win-win-win, you know, in every possible way. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, like, I mean, just when I partake in the PDs, it's like when you've got a room filled with 12 coaches, all with different backgrounds and different experiences, that becomes just a melting pot of different ideas, right? And people challenging each other. And we know through challenge comes growth. Going back to, like, the one of the first questions, it was like, how do we run it? Well, just like we talked about before, we just reverse engineer it. Again, like, you go in with an intention and you just reverse engineer it. One thing that I kind of not struggled with, but it was a learning curve for me. I think context is always important. Just like we have with these questions, we've got to have some sort of context. I mean, when I run the PDs, it's generally on the build program and we share ideas and stuff, but it's very hard if the individual's not got the context of what happened before, and not just the training cycle before, but like the training cycle, like 4 or 5 training cycles before, in order to make decisions right.
Yeah. In terms of how we structure it, we kind of, it changes with the seasons.
Yeah.
Like we'll go through periods where the focus will be, okay, and we often decide this together. You know, when we kind of finish a chapter, we've been learning about something for the last 5 weeks, we'll say, right, what do we feel the next lowest hanging fruit is? What do we feel like we haven't had touches on a long time? What do we want to learn about? And as a team, generally speaking, we'll decide, okay, we'd love to focus on, you know, sharpening our group coaching skills. So perhaps then, you know, myself, maybe Alex, whoever I feel is relevant and has skill sets to contribute. All right, let's build a curriculum now for the next 5 weeks where we can take the coaching team through group coaching skill sets. After that, we'll move into the next one. So something we've been doing quite a lot of recently is like program design case studies. And that's really cool because not only do we help the individual who is presenting their case study, because we're using real life case studies. So in your case, it might be, you know, writing the next block for build program. It might be for me writing the next block for live, perform, compete. It might be for one of our coaches, like an individual client they're working with who has a specific goal. And so that's always cool because the person whose client we're working on is learning through just getting, like you said, this melting pot of ideas from 12 other people. And then, you know, we are all learning by just going through that same process, because at the end of the day, principles are always the same. Like you said, like what is a goal? What is an intention? Reverse engineer, you know, go through the steps that we always go through when it comes to program design, and bang, the last thing you're going to do is fill in the steps, reps, exercise selection, so on and so forth. And I know those are always fun. Like those are never not fun sessions, because someone always has a different way to look at it, or a different thought, or a different idea to tackle the problem. What do you think?
Nice. I like it.
Yeah.
Really good.
So I think, you know, to answer the question, it's like, firstly, acknowledge like what skill sets do you, if you're someone who's running PD, because I know the person who asked this is a leader within his own gym and wants to start something similar, you know, firstly ask yourself the question, you know, what skill sets do you have that you can share with your people? Number 2 is like, another question is like, what do we need as an organization?
That's what I was going to say. Just ask your coaches, what do you guys feel that we need to upskill, right?
Where do we need to step up our game? Where do we need to improve? And then, you know, the next one is like, what resources do you need to do that? Sometimes, you know, you don't need any other resources other than the team that you have. This is kind of like where we're at. Like we don't often need more resources than the people we have here. Sometimes we'll have, you know, like for example, I did the N1 course, and everything I learned on that course, I just relayed back to the team. So, you know, when we have individuals in your team who are, let's say, investing time and energy into learning from external sources, like I think that should always be fed back into team. And as a company, you know, I want to financially support people to go and do those things, knowing that that's always going to get fed back into company. We're all going to learn through that person.
Nice.
And it just keep on asking questions. What do you want to learn about? And just keep on changing. But I do think creating a consistent schedule where professional development is in there every single week, you know, no matter what, do it. And like, if you don't have something planned, there's always something you can do.
There's always something.
Sometimes we'll just sit and talk about like, tell me one win from the week. Tell me something.
One challenge.
Yeah, one challenge from the week. And that always like sparks amazing conversation, because like it starts with people just sharing their struggles. Then it starts as like, it goes into like team therapy, and then people then like, oh, I'm struggling with the same thing. Yeah. Just make that time for yourself. Make that time for your team.
Like it.
Question 7. If you could pick one strength exercise to do for the rest of your life, what would it be? This question gets asked a lot. I'll just a bit of context here. One of our members saw it on another Instagram page, and then they had tagged me in it and said, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So I responded with mine, and then I posed the question to our team and put it on my Instagram to see what people thought. So I'm going to let you go first. You know what my answer is. I think you might have changed yours though.
Yeah, I know what your answer is. Yeah. But when we first had the conversation, I said RDL. Reason I said RDL is, well, I think that hinging is obviously very important in life. When you think of injuries, we're generally thinking of back injuries, right? 9 times out of 10 when someone's come to the gym, I've got a sore back. Why is it? Just because, well, they don't know how to hinge, maybe glutes, hamstrings. But then when I thought about it again and reflected, I kind of want to say split squat.
Oh, what type of split squat?
Probably like a quad bi split squat.
It's like a neo-toe style split squat.
Not like a full ATG, but like bias in that quad. Again, reason being, well, like we talked about in the front squats, like that kind of spurred that idea. It's like, well, we use our legs a lot, up and down stairs, going back downstairs. Like that quad is super important when you're working the split squat. Well, you're also working core.
It's a good exercise.
Yeah, there's lots of good exercises. It's hard.
I think the things I'm weighing up when I ask that question. Number one, so what you talked about was a pattern, the movement pattern. How much carryover does that pattern have to real life? So you talked about the hinge, and then you talked about like the split squat having carryover to things like walking downstairs, walking, etc. Hinge, picking up things. The second question is like also like, what's the overall motor unit or muscle recruitment of that exercise? Sure. So I'd say an RDL would probably have a greater recruitment.
More than a split squat.
You've got obviously glutes, hamstrings, you've got lats, you've got grip, you've got the upper back. But obviously what you don't have, you've got no quads, ankles not dorsiflexed, no tibialis. You do have some pecs, and pecs working their shortened position. Yeah. Split squats. Let's say you're using a barbell. Exactly. If it's loaded on your back, it's not really much upper body being used. A lot of quad, glute lengthened, not much hamstring.
Core's working.
Core for sure. Okay, so my choice was a front squat.
Yeah. The front squat is a really good choice, but I obviously can't choose the same one as you.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
Thank you for that. So I the reason I chose front squat is I do think generally in life we're more anteriorly biased creatures.
Yeah.
So when you think about anterior bias, like the upper body, like we do much more pushing than pulling. So the kind of the pecs, the anterior delts, the kind of rounded posture when we sit at laptops. If you
sitting
kind of
on a desk,
sit on a desk, like we generally do things more in front of our body than pulling. And then I would say generally speaking, that's actually a hard one. I'd say lower body's actually quite balanced. So the glutes, hamstrings, and quads are all big muscles that do a lot of work. But the reason I chose a front squat is also thinking about the function of knees traveling over toes. And I think that's a really important function that cripples a lot of people in later life, is that they lose that strength with knees over toes. And why is that important? Well, it's like, okay, just even walking, every time you walk, your knee is traveling over your toes, which a split squat would achieve as well. Walking downstairs, walking upstairs. I mean, just a basic squatting pattern is so important. Like you can do it with so many things. Your glutes are still being trained. Your hamstrings are being lengthened, your quads are working, you're cultivating range of motion in the ankles, like full dorsiflexion.
Just hip health, just getting down in that position.
Yeah, right. Just general. There's so much working, adductors, abductors. I mean, there's a lot of bracing, of course. Not much upper body. I'd say like the lats and the pecs are stabilizers, really.
So my question is that, I think I know the answer, but why would you choose front squat over back squat?
Because we are just more, again, when you think about the functional carryover of squatting, we do everything squatting based with something in front of us, whether it's like picking a child up or like, lowering something down. There is really not a whole bunch where we're putting something on our back and squatting it. Like if I got a backpack on, I still wouldn't squat. I'd probably just hinge. And with that said, the argument could be made to say that, well, if you're
training
doing
that much,
you're doing so much anterior squatting in life anyway, maybe a back squat would be good to offset, to balance you out a bit. Because you do know with the back squat, you're going to get a little bit more, lower back, glutes, you can get a little bit more hamstring.
It's a tough one.
I would stick with the front squat.
Well, I'll probably go, I don't know then. I'll stick with split squat.
Split squat. We put some good arguments for both.
Did.
Okay, next question.
What are we on? 8?
Number 8.
Whoa.
Why do you put so much time and energy into your Instagram profile?
Should I go?
Please.
Just spitballing here. I think that Instagram is a really, really good tool in terms of, especially if you're a coach. It's an opportunity to share your thoughts and connect with other people from all over the world. Like I've got people that we follow each other and we've got social interactions that I've never met, but we've cultivated a really good relationship. You're maybe talking to people that are like-minded, and you're able to find those people that are a bit more like-minded that you might not be able to find in your social circles. What else? Why else? I'll let you go ahead now.
I mean, I totally agree with what you said. I think when I go back, my Instagram profile has a purpose.
Yeah.
And I think like in my name alone, the purpose is clear. Like I'm putting myself out there as the coach. And when I think about that, it's like my purpose as a coach is I want to try to positively impact people with the skill set and the knowledge that I have, the expertise that I have in my field. It doesn't mean I don't share insights to what my everyday life is outside of coaching, because I think that's also important, because people, even like, you know, what attracts people to a certain coach is often just like the human aspect. Sure. Like they resonate and they connect with the person and the values and the things they stand for. But when I think about Instagram, I think it's just this amazing platform for me to be able to further achieve my purpose. And it's like, it's free of charge. You connect with a massive audience. You can really help people. You know, I've seen so much with just sharing my struggles, sharing the knowledge, sharing my experiences, how many people I have, you know, message me and, you know, like I enjoy the conversations that I have with those people over messages almost more than just put the content up. You know, it's like I want to put meaningful content that resonates and entices and sparks conversation and thoughts. And I just think it's so cool to do it. You know, I definitely think about my relationship with Instagram over the years. It's been, you know, there's been ups and downs, been a bit of a roller coaster journey, but the more and more I've had clarity on why I have it, which is, you know, as a means of helping people and doing my job, essentially, my call, I see it more than a job, but like my calling in life. And I have this ability to do it through this free profile, this free platform. I'm like, it's simple. So it's like, I don't have stress around what I feel like I should be posting. If I think something's gonna be of value to someone, I'll post it. You know, I have more clarity on what I want to be posting now, because it's things around coaching that's going to help people. Like, you know, is a half naked photo of me cooking fajitas going to be positively impacting? Well, you never know.
Resonate with someone.
It probably will resonate with someone. Will. But generally speaking, you know what I mean?
And I think what that goes back to is you being clear on who you are and who you want to attract. Like that's the underlying message. I speak to coaches all the time, and they struggle with Instagram. Should I be posting this? Should I be posting that? And they put so much effort into it. When, like you said, if you're clear on who you are and who you want to attract, well, that message is the same across all your posts, essentially. It's rinse and repeat, right? And when you're clear, it makes that message easy. You don't really have to think about it that much. If you're spending 20 minutes trying to figure out what to write in a post, well, it probably means that you're maybe a bit misaligned in terms of you've got so many messages, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and I resonate. That's a really, really good point. I mean, I resonate totally with that last example. You know, when you don't have clarity on who you are, you end up spending time second guessing what you're posting, because you're spending all this time being someone that actually you're authentically not. And instead what you're doing, you're trying to please your audience by thinking, what do they want to hear? What do they want to hear? What should I post? What's going to get the most likes? What's going to get the most engagement? When really, when you have authentic, clarity on who you authentically want to be, just be yourself. And as I said, I'll quote Nick, it was Nick Jordan, who I've had on the podcast a couple of times. You know, I think it was one of the best compliments I've probably ever received is when I interviewed him on the podcast, and he said, you know what, Ed, you are who you are in real life is exactly who you are on Instagram. And I was like, that's awesome.
That's so good.
And, you know, him saying that has made me think more about when I post. It's like, I just want to be authentically me. And that's what I always want. I want people to feel that when they do get to meet me in real life.
That reminded, so I'm currently reading the book, won't go just what the message in the book was, that sometimes we forget of what we say just in passing, but for someone like you've maybe said that on Instagram, right, and someone's took that for the gospel, right, especially as a coach, where people look up to coaches. So if you've maybe said something and you've maybe forgot what you've said, right, and maybe you get a message like, I don't know, 12 months later, I remember you saying X, Y, and Z, and that really resonated with me. So I think it's also important to understand what words you're using and what language, and can that affect someone.
Yes, totally. Awesome. All right, number 9. How do you earn respect as a coach?
That's a big question.
Have a go.
I'll try and keep it short.
Actually, maybe can I ask you, like, what's your journey been like, you know, transitioning into earning respect as a coach? Because I think, you know, you came into it in later life, and, you know, having worked in a complete different industry to transitioning as a fully grown man into coaching. What was your process of earning respect like?
I think it just basically echoing what we just said on that last question is just understanding who you are and who you want to be. Like having clarity, but also being consistent. Like I mean, I know personally a lot of coaches where every week their message change. She's like, I don't know what this guy's trying to talk about. If you're consistently preaching the same message essentially, well, people can now, what is consistency? Well, consistency is that triangle of trust, right? You've got caring, you've got consistency, and that's the triangle. Well, that's kind of a circle, but there's another word in there. It's trust, caring, consistency. Anyway,
Okay,
right. So the goal is that you always want to be consistent. When you're consistent, people now start to resonate with that, and that builds trust, and that kind of earns respect, I think.
Yeah. I mean, maybe even a deeper question is like, why do you feel the need to have to earn respect?
Yeah, true.
You know, I think obviously there's one, like, respect from your potential clients. Of course, maybe that's important. Maybe if you ask most clients, like, is respect something they're looking for in a coach? Maybe. I think a lot of coaches have, and I certainly know when I was a young coach coming into the coaching industry, surrounded by people generally 10 years older than me. One of my biggest fears around earning respect was earning respect of my fellow coaches. Those are the people I actually felt the need to impress more, so that I was respected. And why did I want to be respected? Like, I couldn't even tell you. It was definitely like, it was a lot of ego for sure, when really what I should have just been doing was just putting all the time, energy and love into the people I was actually serving, irrespective of what others thought about me. But I think, you know, in terms of, I guess, like, earning respect as a coach, you know, like, you have to know your stuff. Like, that's also important. Like, do you have a growth mindset? Are you constantly seeking to develop yourself and improve yourself? I think that's obviously super important. Again, having clarity on, like, who do you want to be and what do you want to do as a coach? You know, are you in the transformation game where your relationships never last more than 3 months? Or are you, you know, in the live long and prosper game like we are, which is developing relationships for 3, 10, 20 years? You know, the different coaches will demand different qualities, which would lead to what, I guess, different, you know, levels of respect that they entitle. You know, the relationship, the transformation coach needs to be really good at actually creating transformations. So, you know, knowing how to manipulate calories and, you know, lifestyle essentials and, you know, smart training programs. Whereas a live long and prosper coach needs to be, you know, developing relationships and showing love and care and empathy. Connection. I think it really depends.
Yeah, I think that was actually a good question to double back on. It's like, why do you need to earn respect? I didn't think of it in that way. That was nice. Yeah.
Awesome. Last little quote on that is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
I love that.
And I feel like I've said that quote so many times recently, you know, stemming in when I've been asked questions around this kind of topic. It's like, yeah, just show your people love and that you really care about them. That's actually the most important thing.
Nice.
Okay, last question.
Oy.
How do you make friends as an adult? I don't know why I laughed there. I'll start again. How do you make friends as an adult? Brackets, apart from going to the gym. This is probably a good question for you to answer, because you've come into a brand new environment, brand new country, technically not really knowing anyone. How have you made friends here? Because I know you have obviously friends in the gym, but you've also got some friendships outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think my friendships from outside came through my wife, and my wife came through her work. I don't know, that's actually quite a hard question. I think it's, I'm going to sound like I'm a broken record, but it always comes back to understanding who you are first.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, you've got to know who you are, like, authentically. And then once you know who you are, naturally, your vibes, they say, what's that quote? Your vibes
attracts your tribes.
Yeah, that will naturally start coming off, and people will gravitate towards you. Other things that come to mind is, if you've got any hobbies. If you like something, go and find a hobby group. If you like playing, I don't know, chess, I'm sure there's groups of people playing chess. Go and hang out with them, create conversation.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like, number one, most importantly, like, knowing who you authentically want to be and being that authentic person all the time. You know, don't waste time becoming, like, stop the time wasted by being friends with people that you actually don't want to be friends with, just because you weren't being yourself when you met them. But I guess number two is, like, you got to put yourself out there. Yeah. You know, if the goal is to actually build connections and meet people, then, you know, put yourselves in positions like hobbies, like social circles, like, I don't know, like dating, what are they called? Events.
Speed dating.
You know, we have a few members here doing singles nights. Put yourself out there where you can actually actually learn about it. Actually surround yourself with people who might end up being your friends.
And I think that's a very key point. It's like understanding what you like. Like if you don't like drinking, don't go out and start hanging around with people that are getting
drinking
fucked
crowd.
up.
It's exactly.
And actually, the question that you asked me made me reflect a wee bit. I was actually pretty fucking lucky because everything that's on that wall right now is basically who I am. So when I dropped in here, people were already like essentially like I am. So that just made life a lot easier, right?
I would also say, I mean, apart from going to the gym was the statement, and I would love to know why this person added those brackets. You know, perhaps, you know, I certainly know, speaking from like a gym owner perspective, how many times I have been told as a gym owner that you shouldn't be friends with your employees. You know, you need to create separation and distance and have clarity on like who's boss and who's not. And I totally disagree with that. And, you know, I would say that actually some of my closest and best friendships actually are within people within this organization. And why is that? Like you said, it's because we have these clear values. These are behaviors and things that we believe in as people. And if you resonate on values and behaviors, the likelihood of you connecting with someone on a deeper level is going to be higher than someone you don't have it. So you know, we're predispositioned to be all friends with each other when we've essentially
especially you, because you're hiring the people.
I'm basically hiring my friends. That's why I do it. Is it, you know, that every person in an organization is a like-minded individual, and that's why like it's no surprise when you see like relationships and couples, you know, boyfriends, girlfriends, boyfriends, you know, forming these amazing relationships in the gym. Something I get asked all the time as an owner as well, like, oh, you shouldn't be allowing that. That can't be allowed. I'm like, it's gonna happen. Like, you know, this is you're in an environment surrounded by like-minded people who have similar interests, similar values. Like, more than likely to
that connection's going to spark.
Exactly. And when we look at our team, like, you know, all our relationships, like, you know, I mean, your wife works in the organization. My partner, she trains here. You know, we have a coach and our general manager. They're in a relationship. We have other coaches who've been in relationships.
Ant and
Tammy, 2 coaches. Like, you look around our team and like kind of everyone is kind of intertwined in some weird non-incestual way.
Yeah.
Nice, Liam. That's our 10.
That was a 10?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
How long was it?
What time did we start, Johnny? It's an
Being
hour. Yeah, solid.
Not bad. Liam, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
You're more than welcome.
Thoroughly enjoyed your input.
As always.
Thank you, folks. Your great questions, and we'll see you here next time.
Cheers. Bye-bye.